Okay, so I think we're recording. Yes. All right. Thank you everyone for being here, and we'll get started. Okay. So thank you, Andrew, for taking notes. You're playing the role of Christy here because Christy couldn't join us today. And the agenda today includes a discussion of SIGCHI awards, and Susan will be leading that, and we'll share a few links. We'll then talk about open calls and volunteering committees, and this is something that we've been talking for a while to just try and streamline open calls and also set up new committees and replenish the already established ones. And so Stacy and Priya will hopefully share some thoughts on that. And then we're going to have a discussion of the CHI budget for which we budgeted 15 minutes. And then we'll talk about SIGCHI events at CHI 22 and just miscellaneous updates depending on how much time we have. And hopefully there'll still be time at the end for questions. So let's get started. Susan, would you like to go over the updates on awards? And I'm going to share the links.
Great. Yes, first of all, I want to thank everyone who has participated in this process, and there have been a number of you, for your contributions, and I encourage anyone who hasn't yet and would like to weigh in to join us in January to discuss this some more. First of all, we had a team of current award subcommittee members and awardees, as well as community leaders who gave feedback in a survey last October to give us lots and lots of feedback, respond to our ideas, come up with their own ideas, etc. The one big change, and I would say this is the only really big change as far as I see it. Sorry, I'm trying to let people in and keep my focus on the same document at the same time. And that is splitting the research and practice award committees into two committees. So we'd have a lifetime research and a lifetime practice award. Those two committees would meet together to choose the Academy members. So hopefully that seemed like a clear issue, a clear course of action, which seemed to make lots of sense to pretty much everybody on the committee. We also are having open calls for both the chairs and members of committees. Those committee members and chairs will be chosen with agreed upon requirements for experience, etc. And there was quite a lot of discussion about that. So we want to keep the prestige of the awards. We want to keep the value of the awards. And we also want to have the openness to the community that we've talked about in the past. So sorry, I'm splitting my attention. Neha, can you admit people so I don't need to? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a few people who are admitting people, don't worry.
Oh, good. Thank you. Great. And that basic thought process was behind these pretty much all of these changes. We want to get the input of the community. We want to understand. We want to make sure that we maintain the rigor and the importance of the awards, and we want to make sure that the award process is somewhat more open, more transparent, and also includes more people from other places, people we might not yet know. So the awardee recognition in CHI 2022 is currently under discussion, since because of COVID, we may or may not be able to have a traditional banquet. We may or may not decide that that's the right way to do it going for 2022. But that is being discussed with the chairs, and that would be resolved whatever the decision is, we want to make sure that awardees feel that they have been adequately celebrated, that they've had an opportunity to provide their wisdom to the community and had adequate claps.
And one thing I'll add there, I don't know if you already said that, but the awardees will be doing their talks as every year, we hope. So there will be sessions for awardees to be giving their talks as usual. This is not new, but hopefully we'll be able to do that this year.
Yeah. Great, thank you. We also plan to hold an open community session on awards to explain, answer questions, support nominations, encourage people to bring up ideas for future award improvements over the next few years. That will be in early January, and that will be being scheduled soon. And basically, we want to really encourage you to submit nominations, both for the committees and for the awards themselves. We're all of our nominations will be submitted through Submittable, and that will all of the information is there as well. So if any of you are interested in getting more information, then please let us know. Are there any questions?
And I've shared the link. Just to reiterate, I just shared the link for the nominations and for the open calls for awards committees. So that open call for the awards committees, it says which committees have spots open basically and how many. And so we'll be looking to fill those over the next few weeks, naturally before the deadline of the awards. So that's something to keep in mind if you'd like to fill that out or share that. And we'll be publicizing it through our regular comms channels. And Submittable is also where we have all our other applications. So that's also where you would nominate someone for an award. And that deadline is January 21st. And we moved it out to make sure we had enough time to sort of go through the process of reviewing and introducing the open calls and everything.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll get through them as we get a chance. Okay, well, if not, then we could go on to the next item of the agenda. And so thank you, Susan. So next we're talking about open calls more generally and volunteering committees. So as you know, we have a few new EC members, actually a number of them, and almost every one of them is thinking of either replenishing already established committees or recruiting new ones. And we're following the open calls policy guidance that was put together by the previous EC, just in terms of how we do this, which is almost exactly the same as what we just discussed with awards. And that's the process for both creating new committees and replenishing the established ones. So on this topic, Priya, I thought you might want to talk about the knowledge that you've been gathering around volunteering, and if you wanted to share anything about forming committees and such.
Hi, everyone. Sure. So just gathering my notes. So over the past month or so, I held a couple of brainstorming sessions with various members, mostly of the EC, who came on, one on kind of the bigger picture of pipeline, people pipeline, developing volunteers and leadership opportunities, and then another more specifically on volunteer committees. And I think that some of the biggest takeaways, especially related to the committees piece, obviously beyond sort of following the open calls guidance that we have, using Submittable and having that kind of open call there for people to submit. centers on kind of questions of clarity and intentionality. And this came up a lot in the conversations, and it's something that I agree with also. I think it's important on sort of both sides, both members of the EC who want to create committees, or we did also talk a little bit about kind of, we may be using this term committee kind of broadly or generally, but it's, I think, also important to acknowledge kind of the difference between a committee, which might be something more formal, I think in line with what Stacy created, where it becomes actually a formal body of the EC that might outlast the EC, which is a different process if it's going to be that kind of a more official body versus something that kind of is more like an advisory group, where if EC members are wanting to bring together a group of people to help them in whatever their charge is. And so even on what seems like a semantic, but I think is more meaningful than that level, articulating what is this group that we want to create, and also focusing on the kind of tasks, like what is this group supposed to do? What are the tasks they're going to be doing? What kind of skills do you need? So that we're really focusing on what we're trying to accomplish with these groups, and then finding the right people for them. So that gets to kind of intentionality and clarity of purpose on the part of those of us who are creating these groups, the members of the EC. But then also by doing that, we can be communicating expectations more clearly, both us to the people who might be joining these groups, but then also providing opportunities to make sure that the volunteers are sort of understanding what they're signing up for, can get a sense of, and both parties can get a sense of what does everyone want out of this experience? What are they expecting out of this experience? So I agree. I mean, that came up a lot in some of the conversations, and I agree. I think that's really important, kind of being intentional. And I think that aligns with the spirit of a lot of what we on the EC are trying to do. So that was kind of, I think, one of the biggest things related to volunteer committee or volunteer kind of groups. In terms of the kind of bigger picture conversations around pipeline, supporting the community. Something that I think is, that's important to me and that came up a lot in the conversations and relates to kind of, I think, the broader vision of what I and working with the EC hope to do over the next longer term, is, providing that, going back to this idea of kind of clarity. So showing people what are all of the breadth of volunteer opportunities available, how do they fit into the community, how do they connect, what are kind of the pathways to leadership, to show people there isn't just one way to kind of become part of the community and develop, move up through the ranks, so to speak. There are many ways. And so in terms of moving in that direction, I mean, there are some more short-term immediate things to do, and then there are some bigger picture things that are on my mind. So, more specifically, things like updating the website to reflect sort of the current information, but also what is out there, reviewing and having conversations with the community about the volunteer handbook that was created last year. And then bigger picture, whether it's workshops at conferences, more sort of standalone gatherings, materials to be available on the website or elsewhere, just kind of different ways of showing people and putting on the page, so to speak, what are the different volunteer opportunities? And again, what kinds of skills are we looking for in those roles? What can people expect to get out of those roles? So even back to what I was saying earlier, just kind of helping people to understand a little more clearly not just what it means to be a volunteer in the community, but what it entails and how people can contribute and be part of the community. So that, I think, were the main takeaways from some of the conversations that I had over the past few weeks, and certainly where I'm thinking about taking this work. But I'm really open to hearing from people, hearing other people's thoughts, if there are other things we need to be keeping in mind or should be thinking about.
Thanks, Priya. Helena had a point here saying we've used the term task force for short-term focus groups to come to a decision or some deliverable. So yeah, that is probably a little bit different from a committee. But correct me if I'm wrong, Helena, we'll probably need to do the whole violations database workflow for all, right? Whether people are on a task force or
Oh
or on
yeah,
a
no,
committee.
if it's a
So we go through.
volunteer role, then they have to
Mhm.
be run.
Yeah. And Stacey, I'll ask you in a second if you could talk about the accessibility committee. But one thing, Priya, that came up actually on Kai Meta that I wanted to see if you had any thoughts about, it was about reviewing. So there was a question about how we think about offering reviewer training to our volunteers, because this could be conference specific, but actually it's probably something that could be shared across conferences and across the SIGCHI conferences. And I'm wondering if that is something that you've thought about, not to put you on the spot, obviously, but if that's something that we should collectively be thinking about. That was really kind of on my mind. And if others here have input on that, then that would be very welcome.
Yeah, sure. No, I think certainly for me, when I thought about reviewing, when I thought about volunteering in the community, reviewing was the first thing that came to my mind. So I feel like that is a huge aspect of what it means to be a volunteer in the community. And certainly we aren't the only ones who are struggling with challenges related to reviewing. And so I absolutely agree. I think that's an important part of this. Something that came up in a lot of the conversations, and I mean, I've seen these materials myself and used them, are the idea that I think people mentioned at certain conferences, certain SIGCHI conferences, there would be, whether it's a course or a SIG or a session, something related to how to volunteer for this conference. How to review for this conference. And then I know there are existing materials, both sort of individual members of the community have created materials. I think, you and Shawan and many and many in the community have created a guide for reviewing. I think CSCW has a sort of student reviewing mentorship program, which I think is great. And so that's certainly, I feel like that fits into sort of the broader vision around both whether it's in person or whether it's sort of synchronous in person, whether online or virtual or in person gatherings, versus kind of having existing materials to support volunteers. Reviewing is a huge part of that. And I know those are things that have been ongoing. I do think it's worth considering how much of this is conference specific and how much of it is sort of things that we can be providing this kind of guidance or support more broadly. But I do think I feel like one of the most important things to emphasize in these interactions is that piece of what the reviewers themselves can take away from the experience. And this is where I think having it be conference specific can be helpful, since the idea is, especially if you're working with new members of the community or students who are looking to sort of contribute, if you learn how to review for this conference, you have a sense of what kinds of papers this conference accepts, what the conference is looking for, and then that helps you better prepare your own papers and sort of start to try and publish in this conference if you aren't already. And so I like that mentality towards reviewing. Also, it's not just, obviously we as ACs or as people running conferences need people to complete specific tasks and to complete them well. And I agree, we should give them resources and training to help equip them for that. But I think it is also important to remember, what is it that, we do want these people who are volunteering their time to review. We want them to get a sense of what they are gaining from the experience and taking away from it. So those are kind of my general thoughts. But I would love to hear if others have more thoughts or more things to keep in mind. I see Helena's comment about the CW program of mentoring. That actually relates to another piece of this that I didn't mention earlier. So in terms of the different angles that I'm also thinking about this, and that all the people I've talked to have been thinking, there's the one side of how do you bring more people into the community as volunteers, so that sort of the newer side. And then there's the people who are established in the community and who might be more senior in their careers, especially how do you bring them in and help them get a sense of how to mentor, how to support these newer and or younger members in the community. And I think that, Helena, your comment kind of gets at that. And so that's another thing. Actually, I was having conversations with some people that maybe if we end up doing a workshop, whether at an ACM or at a SIGCHI conference or as a standalone thing, can we actually focus it on that? Maybe hey, those of you who are senior in the field, have been volunteering a long time, can you come in, mentor? And then also we can make sure to explain what they can get out of that. But I think that's a good point.
And also Geraldine has a comment saying, how do we encourage people to read these how-to guides?
Yeah, that's a good choice. I think I do remember at some point, maybe it was Kai a year or two ago, it was actually the link to one of the guides was included in that email that went out. So that's one way, but yes, sure. I think that is an important thing to keep in mind.
Thank you, Priya. I think we can come back to this conversation at a later occasion. I also wanted to ask Stacy to just talk briefly about just the process for putting together a committee, because that's probably what we'll all be using from next year.
Sure, I'm happy to. So last year, I think it was fall of 2020, my co-chair of accessibility and I, her name was Soraya Preach, decided to convene a committee, and we were thankful to be able to lean on, there's an existing policy on volunteering and open calls that I believe Helena gave a lot of TLC, if not created, in her EC. And we just kind of took that a little bit further. I think there were two kind of principles that we followed, which were to have a very explicit criteria and process. So we created this internal document, which I'll share with you, and I'm sure you'll see the flaws and be able to increment and improve upon it. But the second kind of philosophy guideline that we went by was transparency, because then we have an opportunity for feedback and for improvements and for critique. So we were, just to quickly step you through the timeline in that document, we started by kind of putting out an open call on what we were looking for and publicizing it to the community on various social media. We put together a set of selection criteria. We were thinking holistically about the composition of the group, not individual characteristics, but can we say that we're a representative body of our community? So we were thinking about global attributes and about disability identities and other minoritized identities to make sure we had representation. We put together a spreadsheet for managing internally our selection process to kind of align with our selection criteria. We held interviews with each candidate, included other members of the executive committee in each interview. We then select, one of the things I think was really important in terms of transparency is making sure that the people who had applied also understood the process and the timeline. So we actually shared this entire document with them so that they knew when to expect things, how they were being evaluated, and had an opportunity to critique and speak up to that. And finally, we selected our committee. And I think an important thing to do at that point, we had 80 applications for this, which is very high number compared to other committees. What we did is we put together a summary of ways that people who weren't selected for the committee could continue to be involved. So thinking about the kind of holistic process and transitioning people and making sure everyone feels like their willingness to volunteer in the community is honored and respected. So ultimately, I can just share with you what our open call looked like as an example. I'm really happy. Sorry, I hadn't really prepared comments for this morning. So this is a little scatterbrained, but I'm very happy to meet with anybody about how we navigated things. And I'm also very excited to learn about the ways that you improve on our process and make this even better going forward.
Thank you, Stacy. That was a lot of detail, and thank you for sharing the documents that you did as well. Okay, so I think we can move on to the next agenda item. Hold on, I'm just. Okay, so just checking. Okay. All right, so I think next we have the CHI budget. And before we get started discussing that, I just wanted to mention that we sent out an email about 20 hours ago, so by evening, possibly your morning, that said that there was going to be an increase in registration fees, and I just wanted to say that that was an error, that was a mistake, sending out that email, and we hope that you're not here just because that email went out, but that was definitely not something that we should have sent out. So I'm sorry about that. And we're here to basically talk about registration, but also many other things as they relate to the CHI budget. And Regan, who's the CHI Steering Committee Chair, will be talking about this. So Regan, please go ahead.
Thanks, Neha. If you could actually enable my screen sharing so that I could present the stuff, that'd be awesome. Yeah, so just for those of you who don't know, the CHI Steering Committee goes over the budget and then brings it to the EC for approval. There's the CHI 2022 chairs in this case, prepared the budget based on previous years, and there's a budget advisory group as well in the steering committee. And then we bring it to the EC with a lot of help from Sade, who's also here. Okay, thank you very much for enabling that. I hope that. Okay, you should see my slides. Google, thanks. All right, so I'm just going to quickly go through some of the history and context and where we're at with CHI budgeting so that you have a good idea of why these numbers are the way they are. So I think a lot of you already know this, but CHI registration fees have not increased since 2008 when we were in Florence, when they needed an increase to cover those costs. But during this time, inflation has risen more than 22% in the US. So there have been rising costs associated with running CHI. Also during this time, financial supports provided by CHI to address certain inequities have also risen. So some examples of this might be childcare, which was introduced in 2016, subsidized registration to economically developing countries, which was actually only introduced last year in our online version, and accessibility accommodations, which we included as a budget line item following the 2019 conference. So this increase in expenses due to inflation and rising costs without an increase in income through registrations has made it very difficult for CHI general chairs to continue to keep a balanced budget. And it's kind of squeezed them to make interesting choices to try and keep the budget balanced. So since 2016, when we formed the SC, I'm not sure a lot about what happened before that because knowledge before that was not really shared amongst a larger group of people. But since we formed the CHI Steering Committee, we've reduced expenses in a number of ways. So a lot of these costs have been things like we removed the printed proceedings, we removed the digital USB proceedings, then we removed the printed conference program, conference bags, advertising and other venues. These are things that we were interested in removing anyways due to sustainability arguments. And some were replaced by access to new tools. Like for example, with the SIGCHI Progressive Web App, we were able to reduce expenses associated with having our own conference web program or a conference app. And so those kinds of new tools are very helpful and have allowed us to decrease some of those costs. Another example is that we moved the conference reception on site at some point Monday night, because that decreases the cost of having an off-site reception, and that changed kind of the feel of the conference, but also, you know, it's a decision that we made to try and reduce costs as well, and that's kind of just sustained. There's no way we could afford to do an off-site reception at this point. The other big cost that we've saved over the years has been the gradual removal of the PC meeting. So in 2016, we actually started with the first virtual PC meeting subcommittees, and then we slowly increased that. And in 2019, also from a sustainability perspective, the general chairs of 2019, Steve Brewster and Geraldine Fitzpatrick, decided to go all virtual that year, and then we haven't gone back because of just the impact to climate. So that's been a huge expense, and we need to iterate on our review process to address issues that were created by removing this meeting, but that's something that we're working on. But even this has not been enough to balance our budget, so there's lots of creative solutions, like buying projectors for the PC meeting and then reusing them at the conference. We run cords and power cables so that we don't have to pay for electrical outlets. Shade, close your ears. We offload things to volunteers and giving SV food vouchers instead of using convention center food, which is very expensive. A side effect of this is that we also still need sponsors to balance our budget, which is something that the steering committee has been discussing because of the ethics associated with sponsorship and all the trouble that creates. So each year it gets more difficult, and every year the SE is asked to raise fees. But instead, what the SIGCHI EC has been doing has been reducing the return that we give to SIGCHI. So conferences give a percentage back to SIGCHI, some of which can be then accessed through the Conference Development Fund for their use. CHI's percentage has been gradually reduced to zero, and CHI is actually the only conference that cannot access the Conference Development Fund, although we've discussed this being a possibility in the future. In addition, conferences contribute overhead to the ACM. So CHI contributes 9.5% to the ACM on behalf of the SIG from its budget. So I think this is all happening because, and other like Helena can speak to this or whatever, but there's this feeling I think that we all agreed on that we should not raise fees until the conference experienced a loss. But the chairs also do feel responsible with their budgets. So rather than take a loss, they've been squeezing and squeezing and squeezing. So we expected loss in 2020, 21. That's when we thought it would finally happen. But then COVID affected things. Of course, one conference gets canceled, the next one moves online. So here's where we're at. CHI is offering in 2022 for the first time a hybrid conference experience, and running both an in-person and a hybrid event carries expenses. They both carry expenses. And so CHI 22 will cost more. We're also happen to be like in this weird convergence where we're past the point of inflation where we can still compensate through cuts to the in-person event. And the addition of this hybrid experience is going to put us over. The SC has been of the opinion for a while, and we're still of the opinion that we just cannot offer a reasonable conference experience without registration rates rising. We can't squeeze the budget any more than we already have. We've been doing more with less since 2008, and we're kind of beyond that reasonable breaking point. But we also all know that like now is really just not the time when we wanted to put that on the community. Now is not the time to go out there and say like, oh, hey, we need to raise registration fees because we haven't since 2008. So it's kind of this like balancing act. So what do rates look like? Well, as everyone knows, they're graduated by timing. If you register early, you pay less, standard, and then there's late and on-site registrations. They're graduated by role, so you have membership and student status, and we also have an emeritus rate. And in 2021, they were graduated by economically developing country status, and part of our proposal this year is to roll that into the in-person conference, and I'll talk about that in a second. And these are the rates from 2018, but they haven't changed, of course, and so your standard is your early ACM or SIGCHI member, which is $800. Well, what do hybrid rates look like? Well, fees set in 2021 were for an online conference, but don't represent the experience that will be offered with hybrid attendance at CHI 22. I think a lot of the conferences that have been going on this past year have been a combination of streaming and back channel communications. But that's not what will be happening at CHI 22. It'll be a different platform. We're streaming live presentations. There'll be archiving of content for asynchronous consumption and two-way communication between the attendees that are in person and remote. Another thing about hybrid conferences that you might not know is that the cost of the conference platform is actually fairly similar to physical venues for a conference of the scale of CHI. And the logistic support that we've been quoted is actually like about twice as much as supporting the in-person conference if we don't consider the exhibiting part. The feedback from our attendees last year in the conference survey and also from the survey that was done by the 22 team suggests that we need to do more. That it's not enough just to have this streaming and back channel, but that also will cost more. So Simone and Cliff are going to audit the costs of the CHI 2022 conference and extract the true costs of hybrid attendance from the physical event. So they're going to actually try and determine what the true cost of the hybrid attendance will be. We also think that a hybrid conference experience will cost more than is reflected in these online registration rates from 2021, but will also provide value to attendees. And this is what the registration rates were last year for the online conference. So that same category of early ACM members, 260 instead of 800. So what we're proposing for approval today, so working together, we all know that we're in a position with asking people to pay more right now is tough. So we're agreeing to keep the fees the same as in 2022 for both the person and the hybrid event, although we do think the hybrid event will offer more value than where the fees are currently set. But in a spirit of kind of like, working together to address the situation that we're in, we agreed to keep the fees the same. We're also proposing to add a reduction in fees for attendees from economically developing countries, similar to what the online rates did in 2021. So this would be 80% rate for category H and 25% rate for category I. Simone looked into the historical registration data, and it looks like it won't have a major impact on our budget to do that, given who's been attending from where. And if it did have an impact on our budget, we consider that a good thing, because it would suggest that we're investing in the global reach of CHI. And if we could actually attract more people from these countries, then that would actually be a positive thing, we think. So that's could be seen as more of an investment than a cost. And we're also seeking registration count approval at the following amounts. So for the in-person conference, we've budgeted for 1,960 paid attendees, which is 60% of those who showed up in 2019. So just more than half. And of course, this is paid attendees. So these numbers are lower than what you might expect, because there's so many people who are actually at the conference who aren't paying. And I can get into that if you're interested. For the hybrid conference, we budgeted for 1,908 paid attendees, which was, if we took how many people came last year online and subtracted how many people we are budgeting for in person, and then we took 72.5% of that. Just to be conservative, that not all people will show up again this year. In order to make this budget balance, I'm not going to go through all this in detail, but this is where we're at in terms of what we can do with this kind of money. So we've removed all publication production support, moving this effort to authors and volunteers. We removed the Wednesday evening reception. We removed the newcomer Sunday reception. We reduced expenses associated with keynote speakers, and the chairs will turn to alternative solutions and for plenary events, and also the effort of volunteers to make that happen. We removed all design costs, moving this to volunteers. We removed all planning meetings, including the PC meeting. We removed committee recognition gifts. We removed the printed conference at a glance program. We removed the upgraded conference Wi-Fi fee, which is very expensive, and we'll use the convention center and networking, reserving additional networking costs for those stable streaming connections for the hybrid experience. We've reduced course honor area to 250. We've reduced travel support for anyone who has to be there but cannot make it. We have the chair's discretionary fund, which right now is at $10,000, and that's the only thing that chairs have to be able to kind of offer events at the conference. And every chair, so it's there's little opportunity for these organizers to put their stamp on the event itself. And we've reduced the remaining food and beverage costs so low, and that they're including all the committee meals, the workshop, break food, the remaining receptions, job fair, SV party lunches, and .con food. These per person levels are now significantly lower than any CHI conference in the last decade. And that's created a balanced budget. I'm not going to go through the budget in detail, but I'd just like to note that you can see over time, these are the things that we have been increasing, and these are the things that we have no control over: the inflation, registration costs, on-site logistics, and conference management. We cannot squeeze those professional services due to rising costs. Where we can squeeze are the things that we see decreasing: publicity, programs and publications, food and beverage. And if I just like zoom in on that, these costs over the last number of years, going way down, like conference committee costs, absolutely, like just the having or programs and publications. Food and beverage, the lowest it's been since, well, in any recent history that I can see. Future, we can't continue to cut the budget. It's just not going to work. So we either have to raise registration fees or change the conference format. I'm happy to talk about this at a future meeting. There's lots of ways that we can do this, but it will significantly change the way that CHI looks. Removing exhibitors and or interactivity is the biggest place that we can save. It would significantly reduce venue costs. All this stuff that you see in the budget, like drayage, signage, decorators, that's all just like supporting the exhibitor program for them. Well, not all, but for the most part. Charging a submission or publication fee would separate out the costs of publication for presentation. Moving to a regional conference every other year would change the venue. There's lots of stuff that we can do. And given the shorter planning horizons that are associated right now with COVID, we can actually do this in, for next year's conference or for 2024. This is very unusual. Usually we've been like so far ahead on the planning that we wouldn't be able to make changes at this point, but we have a unique opportunity to do so. So there's lots of options, but it'll require new ways of thinking about why we confer and what we expect from our annual meeting. So I'll just leave that up, and I guess I will actually stop sharing my screen. For those of you who might be interested, here's our CHI Steering Committee vision and values statement, which guides kind of what we're doing. All right, I will stop share. I have questions. If you have questions, I'm happy to address them.
Thank you so much, Regan, for that presentation and for just being transparent about so many details around CHI. We'll go over all of the questions that came up in the chat. Helena, would you like to go first?
Hey, yeah, thanks. So first, I want to say I appreciate this really thoughtful presentation. I understand the strain that has been on the GCs, and we have been waiting for the loss to happen for a number of years. So this is about the time period that we thought everything was going to break. And so this is really helpful. Thinking about what you need right now with regards to the immediate answers, I just had a quick question regarding the things that you're planning on or that you have decided to cut in order to balance the budget for this year. Let's say things, as the numbers start rolling in, things are starting to look good, and contingency is handed over. It looked like it was about 20,000, so it's not a lot. But have you thought about what you might end up bringing back in, if anything, or do you think that just is not going to happen this year? And I know that Cliff was able to join us, so maybe.
Yeah, and Simone has been here the whole time as well.
Hi, Simone.
I think that so just the way that the CHI budget work, there's a wish list that general chairs have, and that's often where things go as you get closer to the conference. And those on-site and late registrations are bigger. So if we get those, then it actually adds more to our budget. And I know that carbon offsets are on that wish list, but before the general chairs would have to talk about that. But food and beverage is something that can be added later. There are things that cannot be added later, like even as late as as early as February. But we could put more. And I don't know if Cliff or someone, you want to say anything.
Yeah, I think if we were going to add events, it would be around volunteer support. So probably the one that hurt me the most to cut was the volunteer appreciation dinner on Sunday night. So that's where we would probably that's our prioritization. Like, in coming up with this drastic set of cuts, we tried to keep as much student support as we could in place. We worked with our equity, justice, and access chairs to make sure that all of their priorities were met in the budget that we were allowed. And we anything else beyond that, we're going to push towards volunteer support.
Thank you. So Wendy, you had a couple of questions. Would you like to ask them? Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, yes, hi everybody. And thank you very much for running this. This is really helpful and very useful. I wanted to, I'll ask my last question first, which is basically about the budget. So having done this before, I know how incredibly hard it is, and really it's very difficult for people who haven't run one of these to have any idea of just how stressful and how all-consuming it is to try to run something. And doing it as a hybrid conference, which costs way more than doing either virtual or face-to-face, is an amazing challenge, and I congratulate you for taking it on. So my question is, sort of, that's my background, my foundation. It turns out that we always budget with the expectation that we're going to not have enough people coming. And then there's a series of step points that we get as we go. It's very, very difficult this year to figure out how many people are going to come because of the pandemic. And we have pent-up demand clearly for 2 canceled face-to-face conferences. But at the same time, people are worried about traveling. There's all kinds of travel restrictions for people outside of the United States and so on. So I recognize that it's extremely difficult to set up a balanced budget because you really have far less information about how many people are going to show up than you ordinarily would. But given that, what are the break points? What are the points at which you start having a significant, like if you can pull in a lot of people extra. Is the venue set up so that you can handle that? And if so, at what point do you start getting back to a more, quote, normal Chi? Because there is a danger in people's reactions about going to the next Chi are influenced by their experience with the previous Chi. And so if it feels like they've paid a lot of money and they don't get much back in terms of the attendee experience, there's a danger that that will have a long-term negative effect. So in terms of trying to mitigate that, at what point, how many extra people do you need to start getting something that feels more like a normal Chi? I realize that's a really hard question to ask, or answer, but I'll try anyway.
I'm not sure who should answer this question. I think that I'll just say with the numbers that we've projected, we have nothing to go from in terms of trying to figure out how many people. Normally we're able to project. We have nothing really to go from, for all the reasons that you've mentioned. I think that our numbers are actually, with being 60% of 2019's attendees in person, and then 72% of what's remaining from the 2021 group online, is a bit ambitious actually, but that's where we need to be to actually even start considering budgeting. Anything less than that, and it's just we just can't. There's no way to create a balanced budget without raising fees. I don't think that without raising fees, when you say get back to a normal Chi, I don't think we're there. I mean, the online attendance is priced so low, $260, that it won't cover the costs that are associated with running that event. Do you have
a sense of what the costs, and I know that's not an easy question to answer because it also depends on how many people show up in person, and so it's complicated, but do you have an idea of what the per person cost for the virtual one is? Because there's a real problem for people going to a virtual conference, because it tends to, at least for people like me, it comes in the middle of the night, or it's tied into your regular work schedule, and it's just, you see a little bit here, and you're not actually going to Chi, you're skimming a few things and then coming in, and so people don't want to pay the full price, understandably. But how much do you lose per attendee for that extra?
I mentioned this in the presentation. The conference platform is similar in cost to the venue, the physical venue, which is our biggest cost. So the conference platform last year was about just under $400,000, I think. Sorry, Shade, I think that one's already done. So this year it's not quite as much, but it is quite expensive. Really, it's more than you think it's going to be. It's more than you think. So the virtual platform.
I recognize that it's just they are squeezing research organizations and conferences. It's just,
and logistic support. Logistics support is also more for the virtual event than it is for the in-person event, just for the conference itself.
What is your marginal cost? How much are you losing per person? Like, you assume you need, you're charging less than you need. So each additional, up to a certain point, like there's a difference. Maybe this is not worth going into with this whole.
I see where you're coming from, and I can't answer that, but it's the same thing.
I have an estimate.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have an estimate, which is, it's some costs are hard to disambiguate because they're shared, like publications and everything like that. I would say on average, we're losing about $150 per online participant.
All right, so that's important information for people to have when you're trying to talk about, when you're raising costs, what that is. All right, I have one other question, and I don't want to overdo this, so I'll just do this really quickly. I just wanted to make a comment about the program committee, which is something that I'm, very committed to the idea of having. And I just want to say that there's all kinds of important reasons why you go virtual. They're not that much cheaper. There are issues about carbon footprint. It's a very, very complex set of things, and I fully understand that. I am worried about the effect on junior faculty and students who are coming in at this point. When I write a letter of recommendation, and this is letter of recommendation season right now, I've been doing a whole bunch of them, and people that I've met in a program committee meeting, I can say all kinds of personal things about, and all of these impersonal things in a sort of, it's not just hanging out at a conference, but it's in a program committee and the discussions that you get and the learning about how do you get an equal representation across papers and so on. The way the current virtual ones are done in this kind of Zoom environment, it doesn't happen in the same way. And so I just want to either ask if anybody's measuring that, but I don't know how to measure it, so it's hard. But just to sort of highlight that we have hidden long-term costs that are going to, it doesn't hurt me at this point. I mean, it hurts me in the sense that I like talking to you guys and being there in person, but it's not going to affect my career. But boy, for my students who are just coming out and junior faculty, there's a real cost to this. And I would just want to make sure that people understand that that cost is there. So I won't even ask that as a question because I know there's no easy way of measuring this, but I just want to make the point. All right, and I will shut up.
Thank you, Wendy. Did anyone want to respond to that? Or if you want, you can respond in the chat. We have only 9 minutes remaining for the meeting. Pageman, do you have a quick question?
Yes, thank you. So first of all, I wanted to thank the General Chair and Regan. I think I'm probably one of the few SIGCHI member who actually was the General Chair for a SIGCHI conference during the pandemic. So I cannot believe the amount of pressure that you guys are going through. My approach was to, when I was doing the budgeting, was to plan for the worst and hope for the best. And we received a couple of different budgets in the last few days for CHI 22. And I did some calculation based on the numbers that were in these budgets. For the most recent one, the one that we are asking for a vote for now, basically more than 75% of the registration relies, or of our revenue, registration revenue relies on in-person participants. Is around $1.3 million. And we already committed or basically expected around $2 million cost for this conference. Unfortunately, this is basically assumed nothing going to change with the current unreliable with the COVID situation. If anything change in the travel plan or the conference get canceled, we are basically going to expect a loss around $1 million. This is basically more than what we could afford, at least based on the number that we have in terms of a SIGCHI budget. And I also did some calculation back to Wendy's point, and it kind of confirms what Cliff mentioned in terms of what's the minimum registration fee for us to break even. And that's basically what Cliff mentioned. So I think the conference fee should be something around $500 for the conference to break even in the event of a worst case scenario. So that's it's basically a comment or a question on what's our contingency plan for the worst case scenario. Usually when a conference lose money, it's around like maybe a couple of thousand or even 100,000, not $1 million loss. So this is something that I think it's really important before we vote on a budget.
Thanks, Pageman. Regan, would you like to respond to that? Or the general chairs?
Yeah, I guess that what we did is we picked we have numbers at which we break even at a current price, at a current fee. In terms of what the fee would be to cover I don't think if the in-person conference were to get canceled for some reason, there's no way we would break even, no matter what we set the online fees at. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's costs that were spent years ago.
Sorry, Regan,
but right now there's not.
If based on the current numbers and expected participants, if the average registration fee is around $500, then the conference going to break even in the worst case scenario. So that's I think there is a number there. And I think that's probably what Wendy was asking, that what's that number that make us not lose significant amount of money. And that's a number that I think also Cliff pointed, like $200 more that we are losing on participant if something happened.
Cliff or someone, do you want to? No.
Just as a process wise, I'm not sure at this point who's creating the budget, if it's Pageman or us. So.
Sorry, Cliff, I actually didn't mean to say that I'm creating the budget. I'm just actually supporting a more appropriate fee for a hybrid conference. That's what I'm coming from. Basically, the original budget you send us, those numbers make sense. That's what I'm basically saying. The updated budget, it puts SIGCHI at risk.
Great, thank you.
There is a trade-off
Okay,
though with whether or not people will be able to afford, like the huge numbers in 2021 that for the online conference, when the registration rate is set low, we can expect more people to just choose to come, even if they're coming for just, I mean, if you set there's a trade-off there anyways.
Thank you, Regan. Thank you, Cliff. And thanks, Paige-Lynn. We have only 4 minutes remaining, so I just wanted to make sure that we cover the other points that we had. And we're not going to vote in this meeting. I think we will probably deliberate further. But I think it was really helpful to see the presentation, Regan, and just for folks to understand kind of all of the costs and all of the tensions that are created because of the tight budgeting. So really, thank you for that. We were also going to talk about SIGCHI events at CHI 22, and that's one thing that we wanted to mention again in relation to the budget. If there are things that the CHI team has decided not to organize, or that it would be helpful for the EC to support. That's one thing we wanted to bring up. I think award talks and banquets, that is something that is what we always do. And I don't know, Susan, if you want to talk to these points, because I see that you're the person kind of going over these points in the agenda.
That's not part of the CHI budget, just saying, like the awards banquets.
Yeah, it's a next. No, it's not. It's not
sorry.
part of the
Okay,
CHI
all right,
budget.
sorry.
I was saying that
Next.
these are the events. Yeah. No, we moved on to the next agenda item, which was basically talking about the events that SIGCHI organizes at CHI 22. And we wanted that to be a point where we took input also, because we've done awards, talks, and banquets. We've been talking about doing SIGs. So there's, Susan, actually, this is you. So do you want to talk a little bit about the future SIG? Susan?
I'm not really sure what you meant, Neha, sorry.
The SIG that you're
Oh, sorry.
that you're
Space. Yes, we have been working on a SIG on envisioning a future for SIGCHI, and it's in pretty good shape. We're hoping that we will be able to submit it in plenty of time. And there's also there's some other things going on as well in terms of planning that. And Neha, did you want to?
Well, there's another SIG.
Yeah, I think we're specifically talking about what events are we holding at CHI, and the future of SIGCHI is about specifically a SIG about CHI turning 40 and what does the next 40 years look like.
Yes.
And that's the only thing you're planning at CHI, right? Because we need to get this list finalized.
Right.
So these
Okay,
are
cool.
the SIGs that we're, so Helena, good question. Thank you for pointing that out, because these are the SIGs that we're submitting to the technical program, and the deadline is tomorrow. So
Right.
we hope that they will be accepted. We don't know, but these are things that we've been planning for, hoping for. There's also the town hall that we do every year, and we have been thinking about other possible meetings for chapters or regional committees and such that we could be doing. Don't think we have time to discuss these in detail right now, but if you have suggestions for things that you would like to do, these would be again off the CHI program. You could let us know. And Cliff, I think you have your hand up.
Sorry, Susan and I met about a week ago too and discussed some of this, some other things that everybody should be aware of. We are going to probably, for our web exclusive event, what we're going to do is a plenary panel of people at the first CHI to talk about how SIGCHI has changed over the past 40 years. So Susan is helping me put it together, that panel. I think that'll be a really nice event. And then we're also going to do a mini plenary panel of people talking about the next 40 years. So we can maybe connect that to the SIG and make sure that, those two things are connected. In the exhibit hall, we're also going to create a SIGCHI at 40 tableau for Instagram photos and stuff. I'm working with our decorator. What we're thinking of doing is creating like a 1982 themed room that people can take pictures in and stuff like that, with big signage around SIGCHI at 40. And then our designer is working on a SIGCHI at 40 logo and slide template design for presenters at the conference to be able to use as part of their presentation styles.
Thank you, Cliff. That sounds very exciting and is very generous to add to the program. And then just for all of us to know any other things that we want to brainstorm, the deadline for these is January 10th. That's the date that I've committed to the TPCs, just to let them know that these are the things that we'd like to do, and then they'll get back to us in terms of other ideas they have or what they think would be good. And this is both for the web exclusive and also for the hybrid event. Anything else?
Can you just summarize again so we're submitting 2 SIGs, which are due tomorrow. We're talking about maybe doing something different for the town hall and thus not taking up that space.
Yeah, so I was.
It sounds like Kai is doing a bunch about SIGCHI at 40. So we're not stating that in our January 10th list.
So things that, well, that's a really good question. I think that things that Cliff just mentioned sound great, but I don't know if those are things that we should be mentioning to the TPCs and the general chairs as things that we are doing. So I guess that is something to be clear about. And also, yes, for the SIGs and for the town hall, that's something that we can talk about in terms of how. Well, the SIGs will wait to see the decisions on, but the town hall we can decide how we'd like to do that. Cliff, any input you have on the town hall for us?
No, the time and space is reserved for you. That's a traditional SIGCHI owned place. So if you want to have it at the conference, we have the lights on.
Okay, thank you. So we'll be discussing these and getting back to folks. And other than that, the miscellaneous updates, we were basically going to talk a little bit about the website and just that we need to be kind of updating some of the pages on the website. And Cash and I have been talking about just kind of revamping the landing page, like the homepage of the website, because currently it's a bunch of links that we'd like to go over and think about the information architecture. In other news, there are open sessions that we had organized. So we did one in November on hybrid conferences. We did one in December on the volunteer database. And we will hopefully have notes for both of those on our blog soon. And then there's the upcoming sessions on both rethinking membership, which Naomi will be leading, and then awards with Josh Andres, who's our awards chair, will be leading. And then the next meeting that we're doing in January will be the budget meeting, and that's a SIGCHI budget meeting, and we'll be discussing all of the items that we would be allocating funds to. So that's all for the miscellaneous updates. I think that's about it. I know that there are questions that we didn't get to, so I apologize for that. I think there's some questions around, actually a lot of them got responses, but if we missed some, please feel free to email us or to email the general chairs if it was questions about Kai. Any other questions that you'd like to ask before we close? If you want, you can raise your hand. If not, I think we're ready to close this meeting. So thank you all for attending, and also thank you so much, Regan and Cliff and Simone, for being here, for taking questions around Kai. Thanks a lot.
Somebody want to end the recording?
Yeah.